All right, so we have worked with Lizzy forever. Ready, push. You got this. You got this. Yeah, big girl.
Patty knew this was coming. I think all of our therapists knew. I think there was a number of professionals that knew this. But when I tell you that my husband and I we had no idea. We did not, it didn't seem in the realm of possibility. It was like the floor shifted underneath us.
It's so hard to learn those lessons with your own child. That was Lizzy, Cece's mom. Cece has a rare genetic disorder. And one of the things I learned in this episode was that it doesn't matter how sick your kid is or what you are dealing with. A lot of the fears are the same. A lot of the worries are the same. A lot of the annoyances are the same. And also a lot of the joy is the same. And I loved sharing moments with Lizzy. It was awesome. Welcome to A Place of Yes, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And for me, that was in channeling my grief into good. Welcome to the show. So today we have Lizzy with us. Lizzy is a mom of Cecily, who we have worked with since 2019. We've worked for quite a while. Can you share with us a little bit about you and your family?
Cece was diagnosed with a very rare syndrome, so rare that the world-class geneticist who gave it to us had not even heard of it yet, called Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, when she was about a year and a half.
When did you first realize that you needed to get a diagnosis or that something was wrong? Like with Jake, it was 8 months. We knew something went wrong. What happened?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because we kept insisting that there wasn't anything wrong, and all these other people kept telling us otherwise. But there was a bunch of breadcrumbs looking back when Cece was quite young. Her pediatrician had flagged that her eyes crossed, which is actually very common with babies. But hers stayed crossed past that window. And that was the first sign and the first thing that we were kind of seeking some medical care for. And then doctors kept identifying other small things. So she wasn't reaching milestones. She had a single palmar crease on her hand, which is quite uncommon and is, as I've come to learn, often I think linked with either genius or intellectual disability.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think there's a disproportionate number of American presidents, for instance, that have and certain levels that have the single. Yeah,
it's something I could say right now, but I'm not going to do it.
I didn't mean for it to go in that direction either. We're very high achieving some individuals who have the single palmar crease, and many who for instance, is very common with children with Down syndrome. And even then I was like, oh, I have a genius on my hands. I still kept viewing it through that lens. And, she wasn't gaining weight. She'd had a couple of, different small concerns. And my cousin, who's a pediatrician, is the one who'd actually kind of encouraged us to seek early intervention. Okay. I was just terrible to these lovely professional women who showed up in my home and assessed her and told us that she needed speech therapy and physical therapy and special education. And I just kept insisting that she did not. I knew that she had a vision concern because of the crossed eyes. And I kept saying, once we fix the vision concern, everything else will be fine. She's not babbling because she can't see my lips, and she's not sitting up because she can't see to be motivated.
It's so hard. And so for those who don't know, early intervention is an in-home service that different counties come and you qualify for. And what is it? It's till age 5 or until school age, I believe.
It breaks. There's different, I think it's till age 3. And then from 3 to 5, they do the services in a preschool program.
And I remember this vividly with Jake. They come to your home. And in some ways, it's a blessing because you're not having to take your child out. But in other ways, it can feel like such an invasion at times because you've got these people coming in your home. And I remember with Jake being so defensive, right? This is my baby. And they're coming in and they're pointing out everything that's wrong. And I love the way you said that though, right? These are these lovely people who come in and do their job, but sometimes it's hard to be nice.
Yeah, initially,
you want to take care of your kid. And then
there's a real 180 with that. But my home has not felt private since she was born.
Yeah.
I can't tell you, there's always people in our home, and I've embraced it, and there's wonderful things that come with that too.
And then there's great friendships and relationships that come out of it.
Yes. Well, Heather, the first time that you'd been mentioned to me, Katie Hover, who's a mutual friend, had seen kind of some of that we were going through, lots of appointments and tests with Cece. And she was like, you should talk to my friend Heather. And I rejected that advice because I didn't think that my world was going to overlap with your world, because I was still believing in, we're just going to get over this thing. We're going to do the therapy and get over it. But the milestones were, more and more of them were being missed instead of the opposite of catching up. And, we were driving all over state, and we were going to all sorts of specialists.
So for those who don't know, Jake's Help from Heaven is the organization we're talking about. It's a nonprofit that my husband and I started after the death of our son. Jake passed when he was 4 years old, and we decided that we needed to create something where we could allow those with disabilities and medical complications to thrive.
It was actually one of our early intervention therapists, Patty, who has since become extraordinarily close. One of these women that I was quite resentful of showing up in my home 3 times a week, and then now is, in my phone and texts me holiday photos, even though, she's not still working with Cecily. But she had encouraged me to see one particular physician, developmental specialist. And even then, I still thought that this developmental specialist was just going to give us ideas for like equipment or therapy. I didn't know the scope of it. And he's the one that first diagnosed Cecily with intellectual disability. Patty knew this was coming. I think all of our therapists knew. I think there was a number of professionals that knew this. But when I tell you that my husband and I we had no idea. We did not, it didn't seem in the realm of possibility. It was like the floor shifted underneath us. And in part because I didn't know enough about people with intellectual disability. I'd had such minimal exposure, like I had so little to go from.
It is so hard to learn those lessons with your own child. It's just hard to, it is hard.
Yeah, the version of me, I have all sorts of things that me now would have told me then, but what good would that have been? Because the only way out is through. You had to figure it out, but at the time he told us that we may never know what specific intellectual disability it was. We went to a geneticist at Boston Children's, and she kind of reiterated the same thing, did a number of tests. Specialists only know something about less than half of the genes. And she said, after test after test after test revealed nothing. She was like, we've got this one test left. If it's a known condition, this test will reveal it. That's called whole exome sequencing. It's an extraordinarily expensive test. The insurance company denied over and over and over, and our geneticist never gave up. We eventually got the test, and there it was, Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. Geneticists had never heard of it. I had never heard of it, of course, and that's where it started.
So tell me, you said, so Katie told you about Jake's, and you said no. What made you fill out that first application in 2019?
Patty. So Patty, who I'd mentioned, was the therapist, and I think has probably helped a number of families. Some of it was, the denial phase was long behind me. And here I was instead, them for something you don't even know what yet. And it turned out we started with travel. So we were going to Boston several times a year. And it's since we're down to about 2 trips a year. But we'd been going to Boston Children's anyways for Cecily's eye care and for she was getting procedures that no one locally was doing. And we were also going for her geneticist. And then it turns out this very, very rare syndrome, very few specialists in the world. And one of them was in Boston. So Mass General, another hospital in Boston, was there for us. So it's complicated, though, to get out of state and get hotels and take days off of work.
We have a board of directors. We work together. We accept applications in the beginning. In 2011, we only had 10 applications. Now we have upwards of 65 every quarter. I remember when we started getting CC's applications in 2019. And I remember for us, it was the travel reimbursements. Some of our board members were like, we don't understand why we do this. And for us, it was such a personal decision to have those particular applications, because with Jake, at one point, we were going every month. That changed a little bit, but it's that same thing. You want the best for your kid. And a lot of times the best. His doctors were all at Boston Children's and they were at Mass General. And it's not just the down and back, right? It's the making sure your kid is comfortable. It's the gas, it's the mileage, it's the meals when you're not home. It's having a hotel that everyone can be comfortable with. You have other kids, sometimes you bring the kids, sometimes you don't, but it's just all of that. And we wanted, and it's the title of this podcast, but one of the things that we have always said around the board table, and one of the things that I've always said is we want to come from a place of yes. We want to keep that application and those asks for our families. We want to keep them simple because we've been there. We know what it's like. We want to be able to, like, if you can do the things that we need, that we are required to have on file, if you can give that to us, we want to come from a place of yes. We're going to say yes. Part of Jake's Help from Heaven is we wanted to make sure that families could get the best care that they needed for their child, for the individual, and that they could get it and not worry about it. So if we could ease that burden by covering those costs, that to us was something special. And, as I was reviewing sort of things, I was like, in the beginning, you were going a lot more, because sometimes like in 2021, we did 4 travel reimbursements. And that means you went possibly more than 4 times. But just
a couple
being able
surgeries
to,
that year.
Different things.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about the practical cost, right? Of it, just these appointments add up. This isn't like the copay when my other kids get an eye infection, that it's a much more complicated process. So all the practical help with travel is I think obvious. I think you explained that well. But the other piece of it is kind of just the intangible of just like that someone cares, right? Just like knowing that there's this like whole group of people and this whole community that acknowledges you are raising a child in a way that is very different from your neighbors. And that sometimes the emotional support of just knowing that there's these places like Jake's Help there makes, the same impact.
I do feel like we're a community. I feel like our board, we sit around there, especially when we have relationships that we've had over years, it's like you're part of our Jake's family. Like we really want to help and to ease that burden. And I don't always like to say ease that burden because it's not a burden, but life can be hard. And if we can make it a little easier.
Right. The kids aren't a burden, but the bills are. That's fine to distinguish that. Yeah.
When it comes to advocating for your loved one, you hear the word no a lot. And sometimes we have to say no. You see, Jake's Help from Heaven has a board of 12 directors, each one with a unique and qualified background. And sometimes we have to say no. Sometimes those applications don't meet our mission. So with each request, there's a discussion to be had, and it isn't always easy. Taking back, like I remember with Jake, like there were things people would say like, oh, you should do this or apply for this. And I was like, no, we don't need that. And, Jake was healthy for the first 8 months of his life, but then he had the seizure and he lost all his milestones. And when the early intervention specialist would come into our house, I was like, okay, so when's he going to sit up again? When is he going to crawl? And they were lovely, and the answer was no, he's not going to regain those. It's not going to happen. But I couldn't hear it. Like, talk about denial, right? I was like, no, really, when? And I remember one of his therapists once was like, not only can I not give you an answer, but you have to stop asking the question. And I remember being like, ow, and kind of pissed about it. But she was correct. Like it was such a kindness actually that she gave me that information, because once I stopped looking for that answer to that question, I was able then to sort of figure out what I needed to be asking and thinking about.
I relate to that. Yeah. So, and I want to acknowledge that, the Venn diagram of your world and my world, we share some things in the middle, but I acknowledge that we have very different experiences, and I think one of the things you mentioned there is with Cecily's therapists and her school and her specialist, she's incrementally gaining skills. So she's doing things that she couldn't do years ago, and she's getting awesome. Better. It is awesome, and it's such a small population. We don't have a lot of information, but we don't expect that her lifespan is going to be impacted. And I acknowledge, that you had in some ways the reverse of that you had to watch your son who had skills lose them. Yeah. But I do share that feeling of you were asking the wrong questions.
Yep.
And so was I. And my questions kept being, how is she going to live a good life when she's not going to live the life that I had imagined? Yep. You're telling me she's not going to go to a typical school. She's not going to go to college. She is not going to become a parent. And I saw only the answers that I wanted to those questions. And it took me a long time to realize that those were just not the right questions to ask.
It's changing you got to just change the narrative a little bit.
Yes, that the questions were instead of, what's going to be the markers of her good life. And I
once
suspect
that becomes your focus, it's so great, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because that became, Jake passed when he was 4. We didn't expect it. But our job became to give him the very best life possible. And we feel good that we did give him a great life. It wasn't that life that we thought it was going to be with 2 boys, 15 months apart and that. But it was very special and equally good and all of those things. Let's pivot a little bit to not just the medical travel, but we have bought some equipment for Cece. Can you talk a little bit about that, like the impact that's had? And even, I had forgotten until we were talking earlier about the iPad during COVID, when we did a COVID emergency grant.
Cece's equipment has been really helpful. One of Cece's challenges is trunk control and that she's non-mobile. So she is a wheelchair user. And the wheelchair is a bajillion pounds and it's heavy and it's lunking and it's wonderful that we have it and it's great for school. And I never ever want to hear the language confined to a wheelchair because she is not confined to a wheelchair. She's freed by her wheelchair. Her wheelchair brings her all sorts of wonderful places. But it also hurts my back because it's heavy. And we'd seen some other families in our Pitt Hopkins community using kind of like a lightweight, almost like a stroller model, but they're expensive because they don't make these and sell them at Target, because most 6-year-old children don't need them. So that was a really lovely, helpful experience to get that. We use it all the time. It's collapsible. It's lightweight. It's much easier I literally bring her more places just because it makes it simpler.
That's what we love, right? It's like quality of life. And we say in our application, sometimes we say like medically necessary, which is pretty self-explanatory, but we also like to say medically convenient.
Yeah.
Because medically
quality of life.
It means it's quality of life. It means that if you can just make it a little easier, like something to just get in and out of the car, something that will keep her safe, then that makes everyone's life better. It's not just Cece's life, it's the whole family's life. My husband always talks about, and you kind of raised it a little bit, he always uses the example of a bike, but right, you're buying your typical kid a bike. You can go to Walmart, you can go to Target, you can
go to the neighbor next door.
You can
they've got one in the garage.
Yes,
but
all of a sudden you put special needs on any piece of equipment, and it just is so much more expensive, almost unattainable for many people. And that's kind of why we like to come in and sort of help with that, because we want all of our applicants to have the same experiences or as close to the same experiences, the same joy of like being in a safe seat and watching their sibling play soccer, or when it comes time to it, sitting in a bike and going on a bike ride, even if it's being pushed by the parent, but it's that feeling of being on a family bike ride. So some of the stuff we do is not just about, the medically necessary, but a lot of it, we live in that quality of life space.
And then that iPad was lovely also. So I have nothing good to say about COVID. My husband was an essential worker, so he was never home during this period. And I was home what I thought was going to be a nice maternity leave with my third son, who was just born. So he was a very easy little baby, which is funny because he's a complicated toddler, but I was happy. My son was 6 weeks old at the time. Both girls were in school. And then all of a sudden, everyone was home. And my oldest was a kindergartner. Cecily was in a preschool program. And I had a newborn. And I was the only adult home. And I'm trying to conduct virtual kindergarten. And we had to recite the Pledge of Allegiance every day. I had to pretend to be the bus driver to pick my oldest daughter up. And then I had to pretend to be the librarian to help her get the book out because she was so focused on maintaining the school schedule.
Structure.
And Cecily has school at the same time, and she's getting therapy. And I'll tell you, no, we didn't have an iPad. We don't think we even owned a computer. I ended up getting a laptop from my work that didn't belong to me. And I'm trying to conduct 2 virtual schools simultaneously while like nursing a baby. I mean, we were just like on the brink. We just all took turns crying all day until my husband came home from work, and that was it. But one of the challenges was Cece was supposed to be getting virtual therapy. So and I'm grateful that the schools didn't just, drop therapy, that they're still attempting, but, teaching a child speech therapy and vision therapy and music therapy and physical therapy through a screen is really, really
Very
challenging.
hard.
And then we read that was this in combination with
So we had
memory,
applied through a grant. So
Mhm.
Stewart's and the Dake family
Stewart's,
had
yeah.
put together something for nonprofits, recognizing how difficult it was for nonprofits to do their work and raise money during the
Mhm.
time of COVID. So we were starting to see, we had to cancel a board meeting, and we were like everyone trying to navigate, but also recognizing exactly what you said, that our families were being impacted even bigger than
Mhm.
everybody was, because there was, how do you do therapies during, how do you do this?
Mhm.
So we implemented an emergency grant program in hopes that we could somehow ease, again, I feel like I say it a lot, but ease the burden. How can we help this? And how it was becoming clear that there was going to be massive regressions among a lot of
Mhm.
our applicants and our, like I said, our Jake's family. And we wanted to figure out how we could in some way ease that. So we applied for a grant so that then we could distribute
Mhm.
things. And I think you were one of our first applicants.
Heather, the speed with which that iPad showed up too. So I think too, Cecily gets, for example, her AFOs, ankle foot orthotics, through insurance, and it's like a 7-month process. So she has to see like 6 physicians to get measured, and there's paperwork. I think I emailed you saying, hey, if you guys have iPads, we would really benefit from them. I have no way to do her therapy. And it showed up like the next day. Like, it was better than like the Amazon overnight delivery. I couldn't believe it. And that was it. And then there
part
she
of
was.
our like place of yes, right?
Mhm.
Like, we know, again, from experience, Medicare, insurance, any of these things can just take such a ridiculous amount of time that it's a little bit, we pride ourselves on that.
Mhm.
Like, once you've done what we've asked you to do and we approve you, let's just get it done.
Mhm.
So that's nice to hear, though. It's good. I'm going to ask you this. So it's kind of funny. Over the summer, Ethan, Jake's brother, graduated from high school. Him and his friends were, they had community service hours they needed, but they also are of that age where they were interested in what we're doing. They have, they've been coming to like our fundraisers. They know about Jake's Help from Heaven. Ethan certainly has been a part of deliveries and, building equipment and being a part of the process, but his friends were sort of becoming a part of it this summer. So 3 teenage boys, 3 18-year-olds, I sent them over to you with the stroller. Can you talk a little bit about that delivery?
Sure. And you know that I'm a high school teacher.
Yes,
at a
and
boys'
I actually
school.
said that to me, and it made me feel
Yeah.
better, because I was like, I'm not sure what's going to happen when they show up.
I got a lot of experience hanging out with high school boys, so it was fine. It was great. It was a nice surprise to have them there too, and they were very polite and a little shy. Ethan was leading the show, but it was great. They chatted with Cece a little bit and helped me set it up, and they had similar interests to my husband, actually, with sports and stuff.
Oh, that's right. I
Yeah,
remember.
he's a runner too. So we talked about them. And then I've run into these guys since. I saw them at the bowling alley event. I saw them at
They
the
were so
restaurant
excited
they work
at Fun Day.
Yeah.
2 of them came up to me and were like, we saw Cece.
They saw Cece in the chair that they had delivered in the pink stroller. So, I mean, that's probably gratifying for them too, to see their work having an impact, right? There's probably a lot of volunteerism. You don't get to see the end result, but there was Cece bowling with her siblings,
That is awesome.
Cece's reactions to the deliveries probably vary a little bit on, what her mood. She's known to give us the side eye and ignore us if she's not quite in the mood, and sometimes like super giggly and delighted. The iPad she's a fan of music. She's a fan of lights. So the iPads feel very interactive. She recognizes voices and faces. So I remember her music playing from her special ed teacher, and her vision therapy all of a sudden playing the familiar apps that they'd been using at school. So it was connection for her. It's recognition and engagement.
I remember, I think it was, and I'm trying to remember if Brian was with me or not, but when we brought over the little Riften chair,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember you sat her right down at the table, and she had her, I don't know, it was like a puzzle thing that she was playing with.
Oh, yeah.
And your
Oh,
son
yeah.
came right over and started playing. And for me, it was just this really sweet little moment, right? Where she was comfortable sitting in a place where she could have like this moment with her brother.
Mhm.
And I don't know, like I just remember that being sweet. Because again, it's not always like, oh, it's this therapeutic chair that is giving her the best everything.
Mhm.
It's giving her a chance of being a kid and playing with her brother. And it was just this thing you had. And, you know, it was just this cute moment. And sometimes I think those
Yeah.
moments are what it's all about.
And I didn't mention this before, but that chair, the chair is a symbolic thing. I have a couple of these like objects in my home that I struggled with after Cecily's diagnosis. And this is years ago now, but I remember we'd had a backpack that had her name embroidered on it. That was a gift when she was little. And then it was hard to realize that she wouldn't actually even be able to wear a backpack comfortably or, you know, walk to school like her sister had. And, we had tap shoes that I was, you know, convinced, okay, she's never going to wear her sister's hand-me-down tap shoes. But one of them was this little play table. So at the time, you know, it was two little girls and we had a little table and two little wooden chairs. And you have this kind of vision of what you expect your siblings are going to sit together and color together or fight together, whatever it is, you know. And something as simple as just like a little wooden chair that Cecily can't sit in safely. It doesn't give her the support she needs. It's weird because I struggled with that chair, you know, I struggled with the backpack, just seeing those objects there as reminders that what you've envisioned is different than what you're going to get. And honestly, a lot of that is just some emotional interrogation to come to peace with it. But a lot of it is also just practical objects. Like all we needed was a chair designed to sustain her weight with a belt. All we needed was these great backpacks that brands are making now that fit on the wheelchairs. You know, like there are those supports out there. And it's great to just have them and embrace that it's just a little different.
It looks a little different than you thought, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's still there. She's still sitting at the table.
Now it is. Yeah.
Yep. So we wanted to do a little bit something light and fun.
Mm.
So we have this portion of the program called Ask Heather Anything.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So ask me anything. It's kind of loaded, but
All right. Can we start with one that's maybe not light and fun and then launch into this?
Sure.
I would just love to hear a little more about Jake because I've gotten snippets over time.
I always say, selfishly, one of the reasons we started Jake's Help from Heaven is it gives me an opportunity to talk about my son. So there's nothing, right? Like as a mom, you want to talk about your kids. And for me, it's 100%. I love talking about him. I talk about Ethan all day, every day. It's nice to have the chance. So thank you for asking. So Jake was born completely healthy, which is part of what's wild about this whole thing. He was born in Boston and he was born in May. And then 2 months later, we moved here to Saratoga. We lived in Boston and we had decided, we knew we were going to move, but we were like, oh, let's just have him at Beth Israel, like where Ethan was born. Let's just stay in Boston, make sure everything is good. It's a good delivery. He's a healthy baby. And then we'll move. That obviously is kind of ironic. But he was just, all he wanted to do was keep up with his big brother. He turned over early. He like cruised early. He was, I have pictures of them where, you know, Ethan would show him how to take all the stuffing out of a pillow. And then they would take all the stuffing out of the pillow and throw it all over the place. And Jake would just kind of be sitting there like laughing. And,
charming, yeah.
Yeah. And Ethan would be like covering him in like the pillow stuff. And I'd walk like around the corner and be like, what are you guys doing? So just that, you talk about that, you know, how you picture your life, right? And I used to have this very vivid picture of once Jake could walk, I'd be walking on the beach with a boy on each side. Like it's still hard for me because it just never happened. But it's that moment, like you just create these moments, right? Unfortunately, Jake was 8 months old. He was never a decent sleeper. He had some decent nights, but not a great, it was a totally normal night, but then he kept waking up. And I went to feed him and I noticed that his arm was twitching. And it was the weirdest thing. It was just this twitch. And I was like, Brian, this isn't right. Like, this is weird. And his personality was still him. He was great. But I was like, we have to go to the emergency room. Long story short, it was a seizure. It ended up being a seizure that they couldn't stop. There was not a neurologist in Albany or Saratoga, like anywhere at the time. So we ended up going to Boston. It's a long story of how we sort of ended up there, but then we ended up 117 days in the hospital. Talk about those moments and talking about having this thing to come to terms with, right? Because it was like, what if I let him sleep with us that night? What if I didn't feed him? What if all of those things of like, how does this happen? And to be totally honest, I still struggle with it all these years later. Like, why me? Like, why him? Why did this happen? But but you pivot, right? You figure out, you come to terms with it in the timeline of which you need to come to terms with it. But he spent his first birthday at Boston Children's. We came home shortly after that, and we just created this new life for us. We thought it was going to be like, we thought we were still going to have that life. Like Jake wasn't in our mind, as sick as he wasn't going to pass. Like we were helping him. Like he was in therapies, and was he going to walk or talk or do any of those things? No, but what's ironic is right before he did pass away, he was having some of the best time. Like he was having great therapies, and he was laughing, and he was, he'd side eye, like you talked about Cecily with the side eye. I mean, Jake was nonverbal and all of the things, but he let you know, like if he was happy with you, you got to smile. And if he was not happy with you, you got to look. He was just this amazing little, I don't know, bundle of perseverance. And we always said that he taught us so much. It was 4 years, but he really he made us better people for sure. Like he helped me become a much better version of myself. I think his brother is a compassionate human being. And he's an 18-year-old boy. I think he has the side of him that is 100% molded by Jake and just that. So I don't know. He was a cute little boy. I used to dress him in this shirt that said, believe the hype. And I would bring it, I'd make him wear it to all his doctor's appointments, because sometimes, the doctors the most brilliant ones, sometimes their bedside manner can be a little rough, right?
I feel you.
Yeah. So I would just be like, you know what? I know he's got a lot of things going against him, but he's got a lot going for him. Like, believe the hype. Here's my boy. It was a Gap shirt. It's still on our headboard on Brian's side, because he just keeps it on our headboard, like Jake's shirt. It's always our reminder. When he first passed, we wouldn't leave the house without it. We always brought it, but now we've gotten a little better at it. But it's still hanging on our headboard.
Did Jake ever have a diagnosis?
So interestingly enough, he did not. We were working with a geneticist out of Mass General. She was making it really her mission. Like she was really incredible. And she was getting tests approved. And when you were talking about the process with Cecily about how expensive it is and all this, I was like, I remember that vividly. She was working very, very hard at trying to figure out whatever they were zeroing in on. There was, a handful of people in the entire world who would have had it. And sometimes I think the hard piece is, how do you wrap your head around that, right? Like, how do you wrap your head around the fact that it's just really bad luck? Like, kind of, it's sort of what it is. It's bad luck. Like, how did this happen? Like the odds are so random, but it happens. And I hate to sound cliche and be like, things happen for a reason, but I know to this day, like, I was supposed to be Jake's mom. Like, I had done things I was a special ed teacher and I advocated for my kids. And then it just became super real when it had to advocate for my kid, but I had the skills to do it, and this is, running Jake's Help from Heaven. Like, yes, I would much rather just be Jake's mom. I'd rather still be not doing any of this and just be a normal mom at home with 2 kids and living that life. But I do know that this work is what I was meant to be doing. And I'm grateful to Jake for that. And I'm grateful that we can do that, because I know that this is where I'm supposed to be.
Well, for my next fun and light question.
That was kind of heavy.
We can do fun and light. So we come from a place of yes. Is there a time you've had to say no? Like someone has just asked for something or lied about their, some.
I can vividly remember, I don't know that it was our first no, but it was our first
hard pass.
Our first hard pass.
Okay.
It was for a kitchen renovation.
Oh.
And I remember being like, I want a kitchen renovation. Should I apply? It was just, we have helped with home modifications. We have helped with a lot of building ramps. And like I always say, we like to keep it gray. It's not like, yes, we do this. No, we don't do that. Like, make a case for it. We understand this, but this was fairly clearly just a kitchen renovation. I was like, no, that's a no.
Oh man.
We also have had some just, it doesn't quite match, right? You know what I mean? Like we have helped with service dogs. We have helped with training of service dogs, but we don't, we've gotten some applications then for like a pure breed.
Oh yeah.
So there's,
yeah. And and you trust the people are coming from a good place.
Yes.
There's some reason
we definitely,
I still would love to believe that these aren't like
100%.
Scammers or swindlers. There's some reasoning in their mind that this is.
And we always, what I will say is when we have to say no, I still in my letter try to give them this opportunity. Like, so this isn't something that we can do. However, blah, 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 blah. We understand that the individual you're requesting for has this, maybe we can do, and we try to say like there's travel. And sometimes they do come back because I think you're right. Most people are just putting out an ask out there. And because I think we don't entirely have this, like people are used to like, we cover this, we don't cover this.
Yeah.
And the fact that we don't provide that, I think sometimes it leaves people not even knowing where to zero in.
Yeah.
So then we do offer a little bit of guidance.
What are like some fun things that you've been really like a unusual request that you've been delighted to say yes to, like some particularly kind of.
We got an application for this young man named Austin, and his mother wanted a wheelchair. He was wheelchair bound, like always in his wheelchair, with the like ventilator attached, like, significant health issues. And his mom was like, one time he was able to be on a platform, like a wheelchair swing that he could wheel on and do that. And I want one in my yard. And awesome. I was like, this is awesome. So we wrapped our head around it. And our board process is interesting, right? Because we have this whole group of really caring, really thoughtful people, but they're all coming from different viewpoints. So there's some that are really practical and business minded. So they're like, okay, we understand this, but how exactly, like, how is this, like, how are we going to implement this? Because this isn't just something that we're going to build in our living room and deliver, or this isn't like, how do we do this? So we ended up reaching out to a friend of ours who is a contractor. And, so we approved it. We let the family know. We ordered it. All of a sudden it was just, wait, we're going to have to like dig concrete. Like we're going to have to dig holes. Like it's a big thing, and all of a sudden then you see Austin and we got to make sure it's safe. Like we can't, we have to do this right. So we found a team. So it was Brian, Ethan, and I, and Serena was with us. And then this whole other family and their kids, because they were doing kind of like, it was like this massive community service. And Chris was the lead of it. And it was unbelievable. We thought it was going to take like 3-4 hours. We were there 8 hours until it was dark. Like I pulled up my Jeep and we were building it by like the lights of my Jeep. And poor Austin is just sitting there with like the smile on his face because he knows what's coming and he's excited. Luckily, Crystal, the mom, was amazing. And I'm like, sorry, we're like we come and we never leave. Long story short, we had to come back the next day to finish a couple things. So poor Austin still couldn't go in it, even though he'd been like waiting. We come back the next day. I'm like, no worries. We'll be there half hour. I obviously don't know what I'm talking about. Brian's like, stop talking. We were there like another 3 hours. Finally, everything is safe. Everything is great. We get Austin in there and there's this picture. And I swear, I feel like it was yesterday where Austin is just looking at me as happy as can be. His mom is crying. I'm crying. It's pitch black out, but he is swinging in his wheelchair swing. And it's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's really gratifying.
The sad part of that story is about 6 weeks later, Austin passed away.
Oh.
Heartbreaking. But it was just like, you never know the moment, right? You never know the joy. And that is why the place of yes is so important, because we gave Austin and we gave Crystal and the whole family, we gave them joy. Like, do we wish we gave it a year ago? Yes. Like Crystal was always like, I wish I applied before. But he loved that swing. Yeah, and it was just,
she did it.
And she did it. Yes. And we figured it out. And he had those moments, so that was a few years ago, but it's definitely one that stands out because it was just so complicated. And it was like when we were saying yes, it wasn't just like I ordered it like the other things,
Yes,
and then it shows
buy
like the
something.
iPad and it shows up the next day at your door. Or, today I picked up a wheelchair at Northeast Mobility and then drove and delivered it. Like those are straightforward and easy. This was multiple levels, but
That's a good yes.
it was such a good yes. It was so good. Thank you for listening. For more information on this week's episode or for resources mentioned, head to jakeshelpfromheaven.org. If you'd like to connect with me or have any ideas for an episode, please email me at aplaceofyespodcast@gmail.com.